Hello, everybody. I think we're going to get started. It's so wonderful to see this room full, and I just want to welcome you all here tonight. For those of you, any of you I do not know yet, my name is Nina Pelaez, and I'm the Associate Director of Learning and Interpretation here at the Smith College Museum of Art. Well, not here, but over there. And it is really my absolute pleasure to introduce tonight's program, which is part of our Museums Today series, which brings leading museum practitioners and theorists to campus to reflect on ideas shaping the museum field today. And we couldn't be luckier because tonight we are welcoming the fabulous Nico Wheadon and our own Tiffany Bradley in conversation about cultural citizenship and the possibilities and pathways for transformation of arts and cultural institutions into more socially relevant, collaborative, and responsive spaces. And let's give a round of applause for that, right? I also want to say this is a particularly special occasion at the Smith College Museum of Art because we are welcoming members of the museum's visiting committee, a group of cherished advisors that includes many Smith alumni who are coming back to campus for the first time in 3 years. Welcome back, everybody. Through the MVC's support and partnership, SCMA has the benefit of insight and guidance from leaders working across the cultural sector. So it feels especially exciting to share this evening with all of you tonight. And we are also so excited to be welcoming students to the conversation. And I want to acknowledge also the students who joined Nico earlier for a wonderful tea that I heard was just fabulous. And our students represent the next generation of leaders who will evolve the cultural sector with insights and critical thinking. So we turn this to you, in tonight. Turn it over to you. And I also want to take this moment to just thank the Smith staff who've helped make this evening possible. And I want to give an extra shout out to my wonderful colleague, Charlene Chang-Miller, without whom this night could not have happened. And as we embark on an evening considering the ways that institutional relationships tend to community and foster community, I want to share Smith College's Indigenous Land Statement. And I will read it aloud. It reads, "We acknowledge that this campus is built within the ancestral homelands of the Nonotuck people. We also recognize our present-day neighboring Indigenous nations, the Nipmuc and the Wampanoag to the east, the Mohegan and the Pequot to the south, the Mohican to the west, and the Abenaki to the north. We acknowledge, too, the presence of Native people among and all around all of us. And I want to acknowledge that we have a long way to go here at Smith and at SCMA to build deeper relationships with Indigenous communities and to turn this from a statement into an action. So without further ado, it is my honor to introduce you all to my wonderful colleague, Tiffany Bradley, SCMA's Associate Director of Communications, who will introduce our speaker this evening. And like myself, Tiffany joined SCMA just a few months ago, and I already feel so fortunate and grateful to have her as a colleague, as I think so many of us do. She brings extensive experience and deep care in thinking about the intersectional, interpersonal, and interdisciplinary arts. In 2015, she founded Colored Criticism, a platform for people of color to be seen and heard in the arts. During the COVID-19 crisis, she also convened Art Off Pause, a live stream series for artists and curators working in affected communities. Tiffany's film work has been shown at Guildhall of East Hampton, Brooklyn Community Foundation, and Rush Arts Foundation. Her writing has appeared in The Nation, Color Lines, Racialicious, and Americans for the Arts blog. Tiffany's also worked in audience development at the U.S. Department of Arts and Culture, Race Forward, Americans for the Arts, and Fractured Atlas. She holds a BA in Africana Studies from Brown University and was a Fulbright Scholar in Museum Studies at the University of Haifa. We're so lucky to have you here, Tiffany. Please welcome Tiffany Bradley.
Nina, thank you so much for that introduction, and thank you to the SCMA staff that makes all of this possible. Welcome to Museum as Citizen, a conversation with our amazing guest, Nico Wheadon. We come together tonight to celebrate the changing role of museums in our societies and in our lives. Our great colleagues Jessica Nickel and Kemi Olensenmi are not able to join us tonight, but we'd like to acknowledge their leadership in the arts and especially in our museum. So if we want to say hi to them for the recording. Hey, Jessica and Kemi! Smith College Museum of Art serves a vibrant community. Our folks include Smith students, faculty, staff, museum visitors, our River Valley neighbors, and of course, the supporters of the Museum Visiting Committee that are here tonight. We're so glad to see faces from some of all of our community. And now to our conversation. Tonight's event will be led by Nico Wheadon, an independent arts consultant, curator, educator, and writer based in New Haven, Connecticut. She's also the founder and principal of Building Fund, LLC, visiting critic at the Yale School of Art, and a board member at the National Academy of Design and the Arts Council of Greater New Haven. An advocate for BIPOC and women artists in all endeavors, she uses her myriad platforms to deepen the canon of contemporary art while cultivating an engaged community of practice. As a consultant, Nico delivers cultural strategy to artist entrepreneurs, cultural institutions, government agencies, and philanthropic foundations. We'll hear much more about Nico's experience in just a few minutes, but I'll just go through a run of show. First, Nico's going to go through her PowerPoint, which will introduce Museum Metamorphosis. She and I will have a little bit of conversation, and then we will hand the conversation over to you all. And Nina, is it true you will be the microphone person? Yep. So find Nina if you want to ask a question. So without further ado, Nico, take it away.
Hi. I'm trying to figure out how I'm going to exist. There we go. Okay, great. Hi, it's so nice to be here with you this evening. I got the opportunity to speak with a couple of you across the way. It's my first time to Smith, and I've been here for 3 hours. I've had a great time, so thank you. And as everyone said, I was really excited to share the stage with Kemi, who is a mentor of mine, a friend of mine, but we'll hopefully be able to fill the space in a meaningful way in her absence. And Kemi, love you. So yeah, going to run through a really quick presentation just because I don't assume any of you know who I am or what my work is about before really discussing the book, which Kemi features in, because the book is really kind of an amalgamation of all the things that I've been a part of. Really quickly want to shout out Beryl over there, who was in the team at Studio Museum. It's really awesome to just see you and to understand this work as living. So yeah, thank you. Okay, yep, I'm Nico. She pronouns, they work for me, they also. So as you said, right now working as an independent, it feels like a very new space for me, despite having always kind of had a side hustle while working in the museum space for about 2 decades now. Really enjoying working directly with artists as an advocate and really thinking about how to kind of lead with artist needs at the forefront of all my decision-making power in relation to institutions. Curator of exhibitions and public programs, that's really important to me. It's not just talk about space, but to build space and to do that with artists at the center of the work. An educator first, that's my background, that's my training. I'm always at home in education departments and museums, and so I'm just really happy to be in touch with you. So yeah, and then writing is like the very first thing that someone told me undergrad at Brown that I could do. And so I've kind of held on to that and really tried to dedicate time to writing as a practice. So the book is kind of like a format that is a little bit new to me. I'm used to writing about exhibitions and interviews with artists, but compiling a whole book as an object in the world was really scary. And so it's just awesome to be able to actually talk about it, because that's what it was designed to do, to start and continue dialogue. That's my husband, Malik. Together we founded the Building Fund, which is, people call me an entrepreneur now. I don't feel great about that because I think we've made $1,000, right? It's not actually about the money piece, but it is about playing with and experimenting with organizational structure, thinking about the limits of nonprofits, which is the kind of field that I've been in for the past 20 years, and what it means to have really direct conversation around value and around artists' role in producing value in culture. So we really serve as thought partners to artists in New Haven, which is where we're based, and really just trying to help bridge some of the divide that exists between individuals and institutions. So, my orientation, this is just a brief kind of timeline of my work nested within institutions. I got my start in 2006 at the Studio Museum in Harlem. I was a curatorial assistant there. It was a really, really formative experience for me, despite only being a year worth of time. And as I was saying to students earlier during tea, I was drawn to the Studio Museum not because it was a museum, but because of the mission of the organization, and that I was able to channel that through museum work, but really seeing the Studio Museum as like this black planet, that every single thing that was produced in and around the museum was touched by black people, and by especially, artists and creatives. And just feeling that that was so different from my experience in school. And so really wanting to understand and be a part of an institution that, like, in every aspect of its work really centers cultural production by people of color. I was promoted to be a curatorial assistant while I was there, and then kind of quickly made a move to serve as the curatorial director at Rush Arts Gallery. We have so many connections. It's like Rushmore, yeah. But it's like another artist-founded space, working with emerging artists, really thinking about the emerging artists of color community in New York. And so at the time, I'm like 21, 22 at the time, I felt a lot of synergy, right? But I also felt the opportunity to really be in a smaller organization, kind of do some like pushing against things to learn what I like and what I don't like, what I'm good at, what I'm not good at. And so it was an opportunity to work directly with artist Derek Adams, who's also a mentor. He's an amazing artist. Please look him up if you don't know his work. An educator as well. And so this felt like an awesome site of experimentation for me to kind of pull together all these pieces of the practice. I started out as a practicing artist. I knew I wanted to be in support of artists. Curatorial work seemed like a way to do that, but I had some hesitation just in terms of how that shows up in institutional space. So this was really an opportunity to experiment with like soup to nuts, running a nonprofit in service of the communities that are my communities. So I did some things. I moved to London. I got a master's degree. I hung out in London way too long, which is the gap. And then I came right back to the Studio Museum in 2014. This was at a moment where I'd heard kind of like rumblings of the fact that the Studio Museum was going to close its doors and embark on this kind of itinerant moment before rebuilding exactly in the same spot that it was founded, now almost 60 years ago. And so I just wanted to be a part of that. You'll see like a thread in this presentation is I'm not a risk averse person, but I also seek opportunity to experiment with like-minded people that are asking similar questions. And so it was a really easy decision to make to go back to the Studio Museum in Harlem to help build the public programs and community engagement department, which was brand new, with a focus on adult audiences. And to really think about citizenship, like what does the museum look like as it goes out into the community in this really new way? And how do we plan for that with community at the center of all of our conversations and decision-making processes? And so I made the really tough decision to leave the Studio Museum in 2019. I very easily could have been one of those lifers that just stays for 40 years, which is what many people do with that institution for very good reason. But I had this opportunity to actually build a culturally specific artists-founded space from the ground up in New Haven, Connecticut, called Next Haven, which is what I did. And so I think, for me, that was not so much leaving the museum field, but moving towards an opportunity to do the thing that I set out to do in the first place, right? Which is be in direct conversation with artists about how they imagine everything being different, including institutions. So Titus Gafar, who is a painter, who is one of the founders of Next Haven, was the person that I was doing that work with at the time. So if I were to put a bow on that, I don't know how many years that is. Many years. All of these spaces share this kind of artist-founded, culturally specific context. And I try and say this to students. I don't, at the time, I wasn't making active decisions in this way, right? But now that I look back on it, I'm like, oh yeah, I was gravitating towards, the institutions that reflected the communities that I wanted to serve. I'm able to make a narrative of it today, but at the time, I was really just trusting myself and my instincts, and also trying to survive. So yeah, I love just the prompt of thinking about museums today, right? Because I think everything is so like in a state of ongoing transformation. Museums are like everything else. I think the book is actually like a really amazing kind of platform for all of these ideas and questions and conflicts to come together. And so this is just what you'll find on the back cover of the book, the short kind of byline. It's essentially 43 folks that have come together in the roundtable format primarily to really riff on like what museums need to change to be relevant today. And so thinking about how you put communities at the center of all of these discussions around access, diversity, inclusion, and also just how you think about relevancy. You know, like who is the museum for? How does it serve those publics? And so, you know, I will say that the book started while I was at the Studio Museum, but it was published in February of this year. So it holds a lot of history. It holds a lot of kind of individual transformation. You know, I moved around a lot during the time I was pregnant, had a baby, like a whole lot of stuff happened. And it was happening for everyone that was part of the book as well. So, yeah, it really needed to become like a nimble platform that we could go back to, that we could revisit our discussions. Some people had like literally left museums altogether. Some people have been pushed out. You know, in 2020 is some of those first kind of cuts within museums. And so it just holds so much of the kind of urgency of this moment. And I'm really proud of it for that reason. Just because, you know, I couldn't tell that story alone. I was able to tell it with 43 amazing people, of which Kimmy is one. So this is them. This is Museum Metamorphosis. It's like really I love this slide. I could just spend hours on it because I think when I think about museum scholarship and who owns those keys, it doesn't look like this, right? Like this is young people. This is women of color. This is, you know, a lot of people that don't have access to scholarship building platforms as it stands in relation to museums. And so because I did have access to this platform, you know, I was like, well, everyone's coming with me. That's like been my approach my whole life. And so the book would not exist without these folks. You probably recognize many of them. There's artists, architects, educators, any number of people. And I think, you know, the real kind of, organizing principle here is I wasn't just looking to people that work in museums to have this conversation. I was thinking of how big the museum echo chamber actually is, and that if we could answer and solve for all of the kind of challenges that we're trying to do today, we would have done it already. And so really looking to innovation happening beyond the sector. So as I said, you know, the kind of seedlings of the book really started during my time at the Studio Museum. And I think the mission of the organization obviously is really important to how I kind of approach the work more broadly, so I'll just read it. The Studio Museum in Harlem is the nexus for artists of African descent, locally, nationally, and internationally, and for work that has been inspired and influenced by Black culture. It is a site for the dynamic exchange of ideas about art and society. So, as you'll remember, this is like why I got into museum work in the first place. This real belief in the dynamism of what can happen, you know, in the form of exhibitions, in the form of programs, but also just in the form of the everyday ways that people might own and claim the museum space as a cultural hub and anchor for community building. So, you know, I experienced a bit of disconnect, right? Like I'm holding this mission. It's like what brought me to the museum in 2006. When I came back in 2014, the picture on the upper left is kind of like the structure that I inherited, right? Which was people sitting in a theater, looking at a stage, expert or artist, you know, spouting some knowledge, right? And I didn't feel the dynamism, you know. And this is not a critique of the Studio Museum. This is literally what every museum does. Thursday night, 6 to 8, like, you know, it's just what people do. And so I was like, well, how do we like think about this differently, right? Because there is a value for these types of programs, but what if we actually like go into the gallery, lower left, you see Elizabeth Catlett, and we're actually talking about the work with the work almost to the point where we could touch it, instead of, you know, a PowerPoint reproduction that almost makes it a completely different work altogether. And so, you know, thinking about ways to configure people in space, this was really exciting because the performance was weaving through the entire, this is DAP line, it was like, you know, a performance of dancers and musical, you know, kind of interventions that led people to all the spaces in the museum. And you're actually like, you know, observing the performance in the round, right? So you're looking at another person's face while also, you know, engaging and experiencing the art. It reminds you you're in community, right? You're not in this like sterile privileged space where you're supposed to have this one-directional relationship with art. It's actually about what the art provokes in you and in your neighbors. And so I just love this kind of like sequence of images, particularly the top right, because you can see the shadow coming from the street, so you can see the Studio Museum's logo, right? So you get the impression that, yeah, that's a street. Like people walk down that street, and this opportunity to really kind of have someone walk by, possibly see themselves actually reflected in the activity of the institution, and come in. Like just thinking about all the barriers to entry that people experience, right? It's like, well, I don't know, is the museum for me? Is it even a museum? It used to be a bank. I don't know. It's like, if you see someone doing something interesting and you get the sense that you could go participate, that solves for so many of the questions that we're really thinking about today in terms of access. So a question that kind of came up really like about 10 days into my time at the Studio Museum was, what is the Studio Museum in Harlem without the Studio Museum? It's like, we always laugh because it's kind of cheesy, but bear with me. And by the Studio Museum, we mean the building, right? And so in Harlem was the name that we gave the initiative, which is really how we think about this kind of itinerant period of programs produced literally in partnership with organizations already in our neighborhood, already our neighbors, conducting amazing work that might just seem, I don't know, like not museum work, right? Or that it's not rooted in museum work in the way that we know and understand. And so this was like, of all the things I've touched in my life and been a part of supporting, this is like pride and joy. Like I absolutely love the Harlem initiative. I'm still talking about it even though I don't work at the Studio Museum anymore, so clearly the love is real. But I think what I liked about it was that it was guided by artists in a lot of ways, right? So when I look at the top image, that's Rudy Shepard, who people know is like a 2D kind of amazing drawings like works on paper. But when this kind of like radical moment of reinvention, he was like, hold on, I want to do a performance. I need music. I need a stage. I need the stage to be the park. I need people. I need, I'm going to wear the sculpture, and the sculpture's going to move. And, we're responding in real time to say, that's amazing. How are we going to do that? Who's coming? Like, why? And then the image on the bottom right, Simone Lee, this was actually her first public artwork. Now she's doing amazing, huge, monumental public artworks all over the world. But this was, some three imbas that she made in Marcus Garvey Park. And I just love this image because you literally see someone touching the work of art, right? Touching it to learn it, touching it to understand it. But it's like, could we ever do that in a gallery? Maybe. But like, a registrar might like have a heart attack, right? Like, it's not a thing we're trained to understand as being safe and like allowed. And so I think, these two images really embodying kind of the ways that artists were leading us to think differently about our citizenship in Harlem. And then this image of Maren Hassinger's work from her exhibition Monuments, and I just love it, right? It's like it's such a way to honor the activity of the park, right? So she built this amazing kind of cube with twigs that she'd sourced from different parks throughout the neighborhood. It was assembled literally like it was staff, it was volunteers, it was people that walked by that were like, what are you doing? Can I help? To assemble these amazing artworks that, lived and responded to the park in real time. And so this, the kind of geometry of this resembles the chess, right, that's like happening right across the little path there. And so it just feels like the way of showing up in the community that's the most authentic I can imagine, right? Which is like, I want to honor the activity that pre-exists. I don't want to disrupt it. I'm not going to like move the chess table to put the chess work. It's in dialogue and it's in synergy with what already exists in the neighborhood. How am I doing on time? Do I need to like speak faster? Yeah. Okay. So, so the book has 3 parts. It didn't start out this way. I edited it into this framework. And so it starts with dialogues on decentralization, moves into case studies and cultural citizenship. So literally like soup to nuts case studies of work in community that involves all kinds of stakeholders. So not just the people that thought of it, but also the people who lived with it, the people who built it, the people who didn't like it, right? It's like a 360 kind of analysis of some of these projects. And then it ends with perspectives on praxis, which is 4 interviews with thought leaders in the field, and it's really an opportunity to kind of draw out some of the themes that are explored elsewhere in the book. And so I'm just going to run through this. The only reason I wanted to show, this is basically the table of contents. But, I kind of arrived at this museum as framework. And for me, it was really about, like, how do we reimagine the museum? It started with this question of citizenship, right? Like, what does the museum look like as a neighbor? Like, what does the museum look like as an advocate? What does it look like as a medium as opposed to this object? And so that's kind of how the framework came about, was like really working with all the 43 contributors to the book to reimagine the museum and its roles and responsibilities in relationship to the communities that they're situated in. And like I said, the roundtable format, it was perfect because it was us able to have really open, transparent dialogue about some of the questions without pretending to be experts in any of these things, right? Like I'm not. I didn't study museum studies. I didn't study art history. I studied on the ground in these institutions. And so it's really our opportunity to kind of lay bare our experiences of them. And I'm just going to go through this. Yeah, let's talk. Okay, great. Yep, please. Oh, there you go. Yep. So first, I want to thank Nico for such an amazing introduction to the book.
Thanks.
I think there's a lot there. So actually, I'm going to start with the planned disruption of the Studio Museum that then rolled into the actual disruption of the pandemic. You guys had a heads up that you were going to be a museum without a building.
Yeah.
But the rest of us didn't know we were going to be museums without buildings until, like, Dr. Fauci was like, y'all have to stay.
Yeah, it's true.
So
it's true. Yeah.
It's true.
Yeah.
And for the Studio Museum, that happened concurrently, and you sort of had been able to plan. But what lessons would you share for the rest of our sector who's still grappling with, in different ways, how to be a museum without a building or with less in the building than we were used to?
I see you hitting me with the hard questions first.
Sorry.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I mean, I think so. At least in the way that I understand it, it's like change is inevitable, and so we should always be planning for change, right? Within ourselves, within our organizations, and so I think having a plan that imagines your activity looking different and evolving alongside what you're learning from your communities in real time feels like good best practice anyway, right? And so I think what COVID kind of revealed is the folks that were already holding a sense of like needing to be in right relationship with community, needing to be able to respond to the number of crises, right? It's not just COVID. It's like the world is just a mess. Sorry for people who don't think that. Yeah, and so I think it's like how do you hold all of that as a tension, but like a productive tension so that you're always kind of having something in the pocket that is ready in terms of responsiveness, right? And so, yeah, I think, the Studio Museum, so it's funny, people that work there, it's very different than the Studio Museum that people experience in the galleries, right? And so it, like many museums, was like adapted over time, reused many different times through many different architects. And so I think a lot of museums that have existed for, over 40 years are confronting real kind of infrastructural challenges, right? So you kind of put that next to the social and cultural challenges, and we're all thinking about transformation. And so, yeah, I think it's just some transparency around what questions you're asking and what you might need help answering.
Right? And to that point, some people may disagree. We'll see. But our sector can be a little risk averse. How do you? You can. Don't at me.
It
MPC.
can.
How do you think about our sector holding that something in the pocket or being willing to change, given that risk is something that we don't always embrace for various reasons?
Yeah. Well, so I think that's tough, right? Because I think small organizations often are most able in these moments of transformation to respond, right? Because they're designed to be nimble in a lot of ways. I think about the founding of the Studio Museum, now a collecting institution, but at the beginning was like, we don't want to have these objects because then we have to hold them and we have to care for them and then we have to store them and, we have to do things with them. And so I think part of it is like, in the same way that people need to articulate values, I think institutions need to articulate values and what's most important to them, and then be guided by those values, right? And so it's almost like it takes out the language of being risky or not when you're working in service of a mission and a purpose
and adapting around that change, right? But I don't know. I mean, I think part of what I'm learning is that like most people are scared of change, and that we just have to find new ways to talk about it and normalize it. Someone in the book, I won't say her name, was saying that like, you know, shitstorm is like our new just baseline. Like it's never not, we're in a state of crisis and it's not changing. And I was like, thank you so much for that language, because that's how I feel, right? It's like you put out a fire over here and then another fire pops up over here and you're like, but can I use this water to put this fire out? Because, you know, but it's all related. And so, yeah, I think that larger organizations are needing to learn how to react more like smaller organizations. I think that's what I loved about Kimmy's chapter, which was really focusing on for us, by us organizations, right? And organizations that started as the vision of one person and then slowly over time, right? Like didn't just leap to having huge overhead and like building a space just because space is sexy, right? It's like, what's the mission? Who do I need on the ground in service of the mission? How do I resource that? And then grow, you know, in a responsible and sustainable way. And so I think that's why large organizations were struggling, right? Because it's like we're holding all these things. I don't know how we actually got here. And I see people moving online and doing everything digital, and we're kind of stuck with a staff of 500, you know? And so it's really just taking a moment to kind of like breathe and like see actually what's happening and then reflect, right? And like make the changes that need to happen in real time. So I don't know. I told you I'm not risk averse, so I'm like, I just walk right into the mess.
Yep.
Yeah.
So the language that we're using and the language that we're reflecting, you have these 43 amazing contributors.
Yeah.
That's a community in itself. How did you, I won't say find these people because they are out working with us all the time, but how did you create that edit? How did you convene that community to bring this book alive?
Yeah. It was really hard because honestly, like, I don't think I started with a lot of, my vision was different, let me say it like that. Because like I said, I wanted to document in Harlem, I wanted to document this radical practice. I was looking at my colleagues, I was looking at what they were doing, and I was like, this is art history, it's just happening now and I'm alive and I'm witnessing it, and I feel so privileged because I don't think that many people are like seeing this work and understanding the nuance of it. And so, because I'm a writer, maybe I can just write it down and someone will care at some point, right? That's how it started in my mind. And so it started with these kind of case studies of these in Harlem projects. And then when I left the Studio Museum, I realized that that was like a really narrow lens, right? That because of my work at the Studio Museum and because of how collaborative it was and how in partnership and in community it was, you know, the kind of concentric circles started to move out. And so I was thinking of work that I'd seen, work that I'd, you know, touched, people that called me and that asked me a question about a certain thing. And so it literally was like a mind map of trying to see like how these pieces might relate to each other and what lessons could kind of be pulled through these kind of transparent accounts of the work itself. And then, you know, I did have a bit of a filter as I began to like refine the vision a little bit, which was, you know, going back to like who authors museum scholarship, right? And I was like, yeah, I don't want it to look like that. Like I want it to be the voices that you don't find at the museum conference, that you don't find published by AAM. So many acronyms. So, you know, that became a really important filter for me as well. And then there's two chapters of the book that I didn't touch at all. Like you'll notice, if you read it, I'm in the roundtables, right? Like I'm guiding conversation, I'm asking questions. I know people, so it's coming from a really kind of intimate knowledge of the work. But there's two chapters in the case studies part of the book that I literally just like gave over to two people that I knew that were doing amazing work elsewhere. So at the Walker and at Designing Motherhood, which is like an amazing initiative. And, you know, I just trusted them. I was like, I already see the synergy with what you're talking about and what you're trying to build and all these other conversations. I don't feel like an editorial need to like come in and edit what you're saying in real time. Just send me the draft and we'll figure out how to fit it in. So, you know, if I were to write a book again today, would I write it with 43 people? Would I have it be this really fluid form that I had to add structure to after? Probably not. Was it essential to like this book and its production? 100%. Yeah.
Nina, how are we doing on time? Okay. Then how are you thinking about trust and reciprocity while you're working with communities, whether it's in the book or artists or curatorial projects?
Yeah. So a thing that I realized, someone said something to me the other day that was like put into words the thing I'd felt, which was like talking about moving at the speed of trust and how more institutions need to do that. And it reminded me like how long it takes for institutions to build trust and to maintain the trust, right? Because it's a relationship. And so, yeah, it makes me reflect back to like when I first got to the Studio Museum. One of the first thoughts I had was I need to assemble a network of people, like of this place, from this place, living and working in this place to help guide the work. Like we need a community advisory network, and they need to be literally at the table at every conversation that we're having. Because the way you break trust is when you drop an IMBA in their park and you don't say what it is or why it's coming, and you're like, it's art, live with it, right? Like, not that that's what anyone would do, but I think it's really like how do you imagine the conversation with enough foresight that you're actually inviting people into it before you even like put a word on paper that you hold as like gospel, right? And so that work was really important. Even building the community advisory network was like a long, hard political process because who's at the table, who's not at the table? How did you find out about the person at the table? Thinking about the difference between living in a place and working in a place. Those are different modes of participating in a place. And so I think, for me, that's where I really learned about the reciprocity piece was that like an idea that lives in the head of someone within the institution doesn't actually like, if it's intended to live in community, it doesn't actually like hold a whole lot until it's actually been workshopped with the people that are going to engage that work. And so, yeah, I think my answer is like really convoluted, but it's the same with institutions as it is with people. It's like you build relationships over time. You have to nurture those relationships over time. The relationship evolves and grows, and sometimes you outgrow the relationship, and that's okay. But like all those things have to happen out loud, right? For the trust and the reciprocity to remain intact, Yeah, that's a tough question.
Well, I am not the only smart person in this room. There are a lot of you. I see some other folks taking notes and not pointing out. So Nina, I'm going to invite you to help the rest of us join the conversation. Robin.
It doesn't sound on.
Testing.
Yeah.
So, first of all, thank you both a lot. This is so exciting. My first time back to campus in years and in this building, and to be sharing it with you is fantastic. I really enjoyed your talk. I missed Kenny.
Yeah.
But the thing that actually most gathered my attention was when you said this form for this publication was the right one, but not necessarily for the next one.
Yeah.
So what do you think you learned from this one, and do you have a sense of where you're being pulled in the future?
Well, so I actually feel really privileged. I mean, so we went through a lot, right? Like I think a book that started in 2018 and was published in, what year is it? 2022?
It's 2022 this year.
You see what I'm saying? Like a lot happened and the book holds so much. And I'm really grateful to have had an editor that allowed me to call him and be like, hey, so listen, the world just like completely, like we need to stop and hit pause. I don't know when I'm going to be able to get this to you because we had written a lot, but then it was no longer relevant, right? And so I don't know. Like I think that's what made that really important was that it could kind of adapt, and that because it was, roundtable, it was discussion, it was informal by nature, we could really kind of revisit it without the thesis of the conversation changing. But I don't know necessarily that book form is like I think it's my issue is with the form of the book and like the definitiveness of the thing, and that once it's published, it's like finite in a way that nothing else in my practice is. Like when I curate a show, right, the show's up for 3 months, it goes down, the ideas live in me, they live in the artist, they live in the work, we reconfigure them in space in a new way under a different title. You know, it feels less, I felt like almost like an authority on something that doesn't feel like mine to be an authority over, right? And so, yeah, maybe it's that I'm not actually going to write another book. I don't know. You know, I really don't know. It was hard. I was pregnant, so it was like, we were talking about this. It was easy because I could go into a hole and just like gestate all these things and then come out 9 months later and be like, okay. I don't think I'm going to do that again, right? And so, yeah, I think what I'll carry with me certainly is that I enjoy writing with other people. I enjoy an iterative process. And yeah, we'll see what that produces in the future. I'm not really sure, but my sense is that it's probably not going to be a volume like that. Thank you for the question.
Hi, Nico and Tiffany. Thank you so much for this awesome talk. Okay, so I have a question about starting relationships with communities, and it's mostly driven by curiosity. Like, how do those relationships begin? Do you ask them questions? Do you tell them about your museum and your story, and like what is the nitty gritty of how they begin? And as a like immediate follow up, how has your approach evolved as you like learned that process? Like, can you sort of storify it a little bit?
Yeah, I love this question. I'm like, whew. Okay. Well, so I think it begins on an individual level, obviously, right? So I think it's thinking of yourself as a citizen, thinking of how you show up, where you show up. A thing that my team and I did at the Studio Museum was we went to all the community board meetings just to sit and listen, like just to participate and to hear what the issues and needs were of our neighbors and understand them as our own, right? Like, even though, you know, I didn't have an opinion about a tapas bar, like, opening on 124th, you know, it's like, people did, and I wanted to understand why, because that helps you inform how you move, right? And so, I think it starts there. Like, I think it's literally in your participation in conversations that you don't initiate, right? Because I think it's very transactional when you're like, I want to know XYZ, come to my meeting. It's very different when you just show up over and over and over again, and there's like an intimacy and like a camaraderie there that allows for the conversation to kind of start from this place of like shared interest and knowledge, right? So for me, I would just be busy, you know, like before work, on the way to work, talking to anyone that I could see, remembering people's names. When they invite you to the cookout, go to the cookout. You know, it depends on like your interest and ability in doing that, but that's like my favorite piece of the work. And then, you know, thinking about when you actually see people come in the museum that have never come in the museum, right, for 50 years, that live across the street or that work right outside, but that all of a sudden they're like, I'm here to see Nico, or like, I'm here because I was invited. You know, it's like, that's like a really powerful shift, right? And it doesn't, I'm not saying that like I feel responsible for those things, but it is about feeling as though you can like make an opening where there was no opening before. But I realize this is for both of us, so I don't want to hog the answer.
Yeah, I mean, I have to agree with a lot that you're saying. One of the many wonderful people in the book, Sandra Jackson Dumont, was like, some of this is just like home training, right? Like when people come over, you like take their coat, you ask them if they want something to drink, you show them the bathroom, right? And I agree with Nico that part of it is you can't sit in your own house and build community, right? You have to go out, you have to walk the street, you have to listen to conversations that maybe you don't want to listen to, because an hour later somebody's going to say something that's relevant, because if you're doing that, you're investing in them and you're showing that your organization or you as an individual is worth investing in. Yeah. And it's only from sort of like doing the stuff that's not really glamorous, or that doesn't have a quick cash out, that people are going to be like, oh, it's worth taking a risk with this person or this organization.
Totally.
That can that can be a hard sell for organizations that are thinking on a short timeline. But I'll also say, which is the thing that we always forget, that we do this with communities that aren't communities of color, right? That we spend amazing amounts of time and resource doing cultivation cycles that are generational for other communities. So why are we going to say we don't have the staff time to send somebody to the church book out, right?
Yeah. And I'm really glad that you brought up Sandra, because so one of the programs that she initiated that I was like just able to carry from my time at the Studio Museum was Uptown Fridays, and it was literally just a dance party in the courtyard. And half the people that would come did not even know they were at a museum. Like someone would be like, "Are you here for the Studio Museum's Uptown Friday?" And they'd be like, "I don't know, I'm just here for the dance party." And I love that, right? Like I'm like, it doesn't actually matter that you're in a museum. Like, you know, we advertise the tours to go see the exhibitions, but that wasn't like the most important aspect of the engagement, right? And so just thinking about like what it means to show up as your full self and to like let loose on the dance floor, and then to realize, oh, guess what? Like this dance floor is a museum, and like, you know, to develop an interest on your own terms and on your own timeline is like a really powerful thing. And so, you know, I always joke when people are like, what can I do to engage my community? I'm like, have a dance party and have it consistently. Like it would be once a month, all summer. And I remember one time someone tried to change the DJs and like the community revolted. They were like, where's Man-Child Black? I want him. I want the same drink. Don't change the drink special. I just want to come to the same party. And I was like, great. We know it's a formula that like we don't actually have to change because it's serving people in like a really important way.
Oh, so we have this question first and then Dr. Nika next.
Okay. Let's get back to Museum Metamorphosis.
Okay.
And I'm going to ask you about whether you think we should stick with the word museum, Temple of the Muses. Because as you know, there are other arts organizations, for example, the Walker Art Center, or where I worked, the Des Moines Art Center, which took a model that was developed during the WPA.
Yeah.
And it's just, and then there were years when people could be embarrassed that they worked at an art center rather than a museum. There's a hierarchy of that language.
Yeah.
So I wonder what you thought about sticking with that word museum.
No one's ever asked me that. I don't know how I feel. So there's a tradition that is attached to the word that I think provides certain communities with comfort, and you know, I'm not trying to like disrupt everything for everyone. So I think if the word serves you, great. But it's a good point. Like I think there are smaller arts organizations that care about objects, you know, in the same way that museums do, but they don't choose to call themselves a museum, and they do it for a reason. I'm thinking about in the book, like the way project features as like the beautiful project, the narrative project, you know, there's like all these different kind of initiatives that ultimately exist in collaboration with museums or that hold, you know, kind of museum practices in a really radical way, but they choose to be a project because I think there's an accessibility to that language. There's an understanding of process and like procedure over time, right? That it's not a definitive space and place. It's like something that would evolve through engagement. So as I'm talking, like, yeah, maybe we get rid of it. That's cool. But, you know, I think one of the most exciting, like, conversations, and, like, actually the most anxiety-producing was I think it's chapter 2, where I was in dialogue with all architects, right? Like, I don't know anything about architecture. But I was like, museums are places, and they're designed, and a lot of the design is part of the issue in terms of access. So let's talk to the people who build the things, right? And it was just a fascinating conversation to me. So one of the architects, Mario Gooden, he's literally trying to like dematerialize a museum that he's actively in the process of building, right? So he has a contract, he's building a museum for like people that need a museum. And he's like, how do we do away with some of the like the tactile things that actually work against your mission, work against the way that you're hoping people move through space, people engage with art, people see each other in relationship to art. And so to hear someone say that's actually like they pay their bills making those things, you know, I was like, we're in such an exciting moment. Like that, yeah, how are you gonna do that? Is it still gonna be called a museum? Yes. But what does it mean that that museum is gonna exist in such a radically reinvented way? Like, I don't know. So Yeah, I have to think about that one. Yeah, thank you for like a difficult question. I'm gonna find you.
I like to look at the people when I talk to them. Hi. My name is Anika. Tiffany, thank you so much for convening this, and thank you so much for a beautiful talk. So I really liked what you said, Nico, about going to like the board meetings in Harlem and sitting in and listening to, people talk about the tapas bar or whatever, right? And engaging folks that way organically. And I was wondering if you both had ideas about engaging communities of color, but K through 12. So I'm thinking about, of course, a lot of museum sites, they'll have like educators, links for educators and things like that. And so I grew up in Chicago, and every year our teachers would take us to the Art Institute, right, once a year. So, but I noticed with my own children who live in the area, the teachers have never taken them to an art museum or anything like that. So it's just kind of me dragging them. And so I'm wondering if you have ideas or strategies just in terms of engaging K through 12, and also specifically teenagers, because my son is a teenager and he's always like, everything's for little kids or everything's for adults. So I was just wondering if you had ideas for it.
So, is that like a ghost, or is that... You hear that, right? Okay. Okay. That's cool. I like ghosts. So there's a case study in the book, which is on the initiative Find Art Here, which my colleagues in education and curatorial at Studio Museum were really a part of imagining. And it essentially started with like a curatorial decision that was like, how do we get our collection to be actually accessible, like not in storage, something that people can see. And so they began thinking through like this digitization, that word is so hard to say, digitization, project where you can produce these like really high quality reproductions of works of art from the collection. And so something that they thought was like, well, what if we take these high quality reproductions and hang them in schools, right? So Thurgood Marshall Academy being one of the schools, the Horan School being another one. And these are schools that the museum had that pre-existing relationship with, right? So they're already doing deep programming for like decades. And so again, like going back to trust and reciprocity, it's like building on that pre-existing relationship. The schools would pick the work that they wanted to hang in their school, and then they would have, they'd have art opening, they would have any number of like artist talks and engagement with the work, but they owned it, right? Like it literally belongs to the school. The museum will never have it back. It's such a high quality that at some point people were afraid that like, it'd be out on like the black market or something. So they figured out how to like, mitigate that risk. But I just love what that project embodies, right? I love that it was selected by this democratic process where like, 5-year-olds, the PTA, and like staff are voting which of like 4,000 objects, they want to have in their school to represent them. And, I think there's one school that chose a work by Jordan Castile, and it's because they knew her. They're like, we see her in the grocery store, she comes to our school and teaches us how to draw. The person she painted, Kevin the Kite Man, I see him on the street selling kites. I bought a kite from him. It's like this level of connection that just feels so meaningful. And so I think that's like a example of a project that actually like doesn't, I don't know how much money that costs, but I don't think it's like $1 gajillion, and it's really meaningful. And then another program that the Studio Museum does, Expanding the Walls, which is a teen youth photography residency, right? And it's like how to, A, train teens how to like use the camera, right? But then B, like see themselves, see their community differently through the art of photography, and then become ambassadors for the museum in the process, right? So there's so many, I clearly just love how the Studio Museum thinks about art and museum education, but there's so many examples in the world of like literally taking things that exist in like dusty boxes somewhere and like putting them in a space where you can touch them.
Yeah, and I'll say that some of the smartest people in museums generally are in the education department.
Definitely.
I will humble brag, our very own Gina ran a program recently that was a river walk that had an inside-outside component, and 120 people showed up. Like, I think that there's a way in which art can be a catalyst for the curiosity that kids and teens already have, so it's really thinking about how to leverage that in different ways. That, again, isn't like the expert speaking from on high. Yeah.
And can I just say, like, that's what I love about Sandra Jackson Dumont being the leader of the Lucas Museum, right? It's like, she's an educator through and through. And we're so used to being, like, in the basement or, like, relegated to, like, you know, the shadows and the periphery. And so to have someone with that sensibility and with, like, a deep care for education, community, young people, leading a museum of that size with those resources is huge, because it's like she gets to model a form of leadership that other museum directors can say, you know what, I don't have a background in education, but I see how this impact is landing in community, right? It's just a really exciting moment.
And I will say, just I see questions and things that curatorial is great. It is not the only path to museum leadership. And I think the more that we value the different departments and skill sets in our organizations, the better we're going to be. Nina.
Okay, I do want to highlight something that we are doing.
Yeah.
And we have done, and that really started, Nico, the last time we saw you, Emma and I, we were in New York talking about Black refractions coming to Smith. And it was so great to have that time to like come together and learn so much from you and your colleagues at the Studio Museum, and like have that time to really think and plan and like meet with other people who are also thinking about hosting that exhibition. And then we had the exhibition. And one of the first big programs that we did opening weekend was a community day where we had 1,200 people that came. And the highlight of that day were the teenagers that we had been working with for 4 months prior, from Springfield Public Schools through our relationship with Project Coach and the Urban Education Initiative here at Smith. And we we worked together with student museum educators at the museum to train, to work with, to workshop these teenagers. There were 20 of them who became museum educators. And on the day of the community day, they were in the galleries and they were talking about art with community members. And it was a really like powerful experience for them. And it was just like a really beautiful day. On Monday night, I was invited by Project Coach to join their first session of the year where we did a workshop and helping the teens to get ready to teach with picture books. And out of the 7 teens that were there, 3 of them were teens that we worked with back in January 2020, who were freshmen at the time and are now seniors. And so they were like building on these skills that they'd started years ago. So this is a partnership that we have here at Smith with Project Coach and with Springfield Public Schools, where we do have teens who are they're all Black and Latinx who are coming to the museum, having conversations about art in this sort of like tiered mentorship program with Smith students. So this is work that we're doing, but I'll also say that as someone who works with teachers in this area, it is a struggle to get them to take their classes to the museum. There's not a culture of museum going here like there is in Los Angeles, where I worked before this, and it's part of my every day is talking to teachers and persuading them to come to the museum. And we have a free bus program. It's free to visit the museum for K-12 students, and still, so it's something that like is a never-ending struggle.
Sure.
I just wanted to share that because I feel like we do have this connection that's happening that isn't always really visible. A lot of the work that we do in education with K-12, especially in teachers, is not something that's visible. We're just out there like doing the work.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you.
I think Ellen might be the last question.
I have one more, yeah.
Yep.
Well, thank you. You're talk was so insightful and so inspiring.
Thank you.
And from the chapters that I've read so far of your book, there's so many case studies that are really encouraging. I'm interested to hear, what is your hope for your book? Like, who's the audience, or are you hoping museums will pick this up and run with it? You had a lot of motivation to write it. I would just be really interested to hear what your hope is for its impact.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you for reading it. That's that's cool. Yeah.
Thank you so much.
I mean, so my hope is that it's useful, right? I'm not really into theory and philosophy, right? So I think it's really that it's something that people can apply in their profession, in their interests, in their work, in a way that gives them tools they might not have previously had. A thing that I'm learning is that, there's a lot of people in museums that reach out to me that are like, thank you so much for this, because I now have something to point to when I go to my supervisor and I say, I want to do this thing differently. And it's for whatever reason, it provides confidence for people that want to suggest a change that, the perception is museums don't do that. And they're like, well, in this book. And so that's a thing I imagined, but I didn't know that it would actually serve that function until I started hearing from people. And so I think, in the way that the book was written by a community of 43 people, I also thought of it as a tool for those 43 people in their work, right? A lot of people are leading organizations, they are educators, just thinking of the ways in which their particular lens and chapter gets to sit in relation to these other complex ideas and becomes a tool for their practice directly. And then a weird outcome, that it's not a hope at all, but this is what's happening, so I'm just going to share it. Museums have been reaching out from a DEI space. Can you lead a workshop for fill in the blank? And I think it's because they see so much possibility in the different case studies of how to work differently, and they want to imagine it and apply it to what they're doing and just need a little bit of guidance. And so it's a space I'm a little hesitant to walk into for a whole host of reasons. Again, because I don't think of myself as an expert. I'm no longer directly connected to museum work. I consult broadly. But that feels like something that's really specialized work that I would actually much rather connect someone who is a practitioner in that space that I trust with my life. So yeah, I think my hope is just that it lives in a way that's messy, and that people underline passages that apply to their work, and then they actually go out and apply it. Yeah? Okay, cool. My hope is to be a catalyst. Yeah, thank you.
I think on that note, we can all go to bed because we've all solved all the questions.
Yeah.
Thank you, Nico.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you. This was fun. Oh, wait.
Oh, yes.
Important. Hold on. So if you actually want to buy this thing, don't pay full price. There's a discount code in the bottom. I can't reimburse you, but the next one. Yeah. So if you go to Roman and Littlefields, that's the publisher. If you go to their site and then type in this code, I think it's good till February next year. It'll get you 30% off. So please don't pay full price for it. And then also, if you ever want to talk to me, you can email me here. Yep, sorry. You're I don't want to talk to you, but I do want the code. Yeah. It's, I'll read it. It's RLF and F30. And then the book's also on Amazon, if you do that, and it could you could have it tomorrow. Yeah. You need the code? Okay. Sorry.
Well, take down the info. I just want to give another thanks to Tiffany and Nico. Nico, thank you so much for being with us. And I really want to thank all of you for the beautiful questions, the contributions to the conversation. It's such a joy to think about these things together, and I hope we will all take this catalyst and run with it, think about how this work can apply in our work here and beyond. So thank you again. Have a great night, everyone.